Welcome to the American Revolution history lesson via the movie that I'm going to create for you. So in this movie is just going to have pictures that are going to slide through, and you're going to look at the pictures while I discuss the main idea of each of the pictures. At the end of this, you're going to work on an assignment that is posted in Schoology, and there's also 2 video links that are also posted on Schoology that I want you to click and watch before you do the assignment, and then submit the assignment by the end of this week on Friday. So you have all week to complete the slides, the videos, and the assignment. All right, so as we get into the Revolutionary War, let's go all the way back to when first Americans probably landed on the continents of North and South America. So tens of thousands of years ago, no human lived in North or South America. So how did these people actually get here? Scientists have 2 different theories on what they believe. One is the land bridge theory, which is probably the most realistic theory. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that in the next picture. The other theory was the idea that you had people who built ships and then sailed from the continent of Asia to the Americas. The reason why the land bridge theory is probably more realistic is because the people during this time period were nomadic people who traveled from place to place and searched for food and searched for, and usually following animals, and mostly probably mammoth type of animals because they were large and had a lot of resources that they could use to kind of sustain their daily life. So the first nomadic people, they followed the herd, and the herd would actually move from place to place because it would be in search of their own food. And as they traveled, they'd set up their tents, they'd stay for a little while, and then they would move on. In this picture, you see an image of what the land bridge theory most likely looked like. Between 10,000 and 100,000 years ago, most of the world was covered by glaciers. And when these glaciers covered the northern parts of the continents, one of the things that would happen is that it would cause the water to freeze on the land, and that frozen water would actually cause the levels of the ocean to go down. When the levels of the ocean went down, what you had was the exposed land that was beneath the water acting as normal land. So this was like a connection between Asia and North America. So the land bridge theory is this idea that nomadic people traveled along the land following the herd of animals and then made their way, though you see through these red arrows, through the northern part of North America, and continued to travel all the way south into South America. So as you learned from the last video that you just watched, that the land bridge theory is the most probably recognized idea of how people came from the continent of Asia into North America and probably didn't even realize that they were on a new land. So the early American civilizations that existed in the North and South America areas, mostly Central America, where you see the Mayan temple, the Aztec warrior picture on this picture here, and in the northernish kind of parts of South America, where you see the Inca person here with the llama. So these early civilizations, the Mayans were first. They were here between the periods of 250 BCE and 900 BCE. They built cities, which is now Mexico and Central America, and they had a big development of the systems of art and government and written language, so they were pretty advanced for being an ancient civilization. Unfortunately, they just kind of disappeared, and no one really knows where they went and why, so their whole existence becomes a mystery to everyone. Some of their remains still exist in Central America that you could probably visit today. The Aztecs actually inhabited the land of where the Mayans were actually located at, and they developed more of a civilization based on large bodies of water, using their technology to build floating crops on floating platforms. And they had a lot of temples, they had a lot of religious practices that they believed in, and they were actually one of the two ancient civilizations that actually were introduced by the Spanish explorers when they came. When the Spanish explorers came into Central America, they actually wiped out the Aztec and Inca empires, mainly because they brought with them diseases that the Aztec and the Incas had never experienced before, and they had no way of curing those diseases. So they ended up dying off very quickly. But the other reason was because the Spanish conquistadors, which we actually talked about in the beginning of the school year, came and basically fought them and took over their land. And that was the purpose of the conquistadors from Spain, was to come and conquer this new land. Now, the Spanish knew about this land because of Christopher Columbus, who actually sailed the seas from Europe to North and South America area, thinking that he was making his route to India, and that is how the native people of Central America and South America got the name Indians. The Age of Exploration is a time when the people of Europe were beginning to want a faster route to India and to the Asian islands, countries for trade. So, a lot of explorers at this time were trying to figure out what would be the best way. Portugal had an explorer by the name of Vasco da Gama. He actually went and sailed around the southern tip of Africa, which was never done until this time. And then most people started wanting to build ships and sail further. With the invention of the compass and with being able to sail further away from the shoreline, sailors started to feel more comfortable going west. Now, there was that weird thing that everybody thought that the world was flat and that if you sailed off westward, you would just fall off the edge of the earth and never come back. So there was a lot of fear in the people and probably even the sailors who were getting on the ship to sail with Columbus. So Columbus was actually the first person to get a large group of ships, three, to sail to west, hoping to find what is known as the Westward Passage. And he does find land. It's just not the land that he thought he was going to find. He finds brown-looking people, thinking that they are from the country of India, and he refers to them as Indians, and that's kind of how they get their name, Native American Indians. So Columbus sails, finds this land, he inhabits the land, he takes resources from the land, he brings the resources back to Spain, and he goes on a couple more trips back out there to these lands that he thinks is in India, and he keeps bringing things back. Well, Columbus dies thinking he found a westward passage to India, but what he didn't realize was this big continent, two big continents of North America, South America, in the waters in between Asia. So eventually everybody figures out that he did not discover a shorter path to India, that he finds this westward, this new world with new land and new resources. So this new land and new resources, most people want to jump on it and get over there and start exploring. Well, since Spain was the one who was to finance Columbus's journey, Spain was the one who was able to conquer most of the land. So when you look at this map, you can clearly see that the people who have the most land in the Americas at this time is the Spanish. And the Spanish will continue to have most of that land until the other European countries, mainly England, find a way to stop them. So in the beginning, it's mainly just Spain that's going back and forth to the New World because they set up like I've told you before, the Spanish Armada, which is a fleet of ships that kind of block all these other ships from being able to sail to the New World. And in the process, they create what is called the Columbian Exchange. As you can see in this map right here, you have Europe in pink and the Americas in green, And all of the words written on the pink side are the resources or the animals or anything else that was brought over that existed in Europe or Africa or Asia and was then brought over to North and South America. So, for instance, we did not have horses before. Remember, we had talked about that in the beginning of the school year, where the Spanish saw them as like these crazy looking dogs with long ears and long tongues. So one of the other things is things like peaches and daisies and rice. Like all these things did not exist in North and South America before the Spanish actually started coming and exploring these lands. So these items are brought with the Spanish because this is what they liked every day, what they ate, what they used, what they had, or even just maybe just stowaways on a ship, maybe just coming over by accident. The other thing that the Europeans brought over was, unfortunately, a lot of diseases, and many of them that the native people here, again, like I've told you, have never been introduced to before. So now they're dealing with being sick all the time and not having a cure and not really understanding why, since they've never really gotten sick before. And it's called an exchange because of the fact that North and South America also had resources that did not exist in Europe or Africa. So we introduced them to things like tobacco and rubber and guava and squash and pumpkins and things like that. So you can look over the list and kind of see the different things that were brought over from the different places based on what existed in that time period. While the King of Spain kept sending over more conquistadors to explore and to conquer the land in North America and South America from the natives, another thing was popping up that was going to continue to make Spain rich. This idea was mercantilism, which is the idea that if you go to a new country or if you conquer a place, then the resources that you find there are to be brought back to the mother country. So in this case, the mother country is Spain, and the country that they're getting the resources from is the North and South Americas. So the colonies, in a way, these ancient civilizations, or eventually what are going to become known as the 13 colonies, they are basically created to bring resources back to the mother country. So this little cute little cartoon down here I have, where you have this woman who has this banner that says she's the mother country, and then you have the little maids here that are the colonies, and they have their gold and silver and their foodstuffs and their raw materials. This is a cartoon basically picturing what this idea is, and you have the goods coming from the colonies being brought to the home country. And that is how Spain starts to become very wealthy because of this. And actually England follows in this when they set up their own colonies in America, where they take their new resources that have never existed in Europe before, bring them to their home country, and then they use those resources to either become more financially wealthy in the form of gold and silver, or sell these new resources to other people, become wealthier that way. So the whole purpose of this idea was to go to the new colonies, to find resources, to send back a certain percentage of your resources to the home country, and then you could then live there free of charge, basically. Religion at this time was a very tense subject. Everybody that was a Christian thought of themselves as a Catholic. The Catholics wanted that to be the dominant Christian religion, and therefore wanted no one else to have any other religious beliefs. King Henry VIII wanted to divorce his wife, and that was against the Catholic religion, and therefore decided as king that they were no longer going to be Catholics, and now they were going to start their new religion, which was Protestant, which is pretty much identical to the Catholic religion except for the fact that you could divorce. So the king basically made a religion to suit his own needs. The king then dies, and his son takes over, he dies, and then his daughter takes over, and then she dies, and it goes back and forth about how they're going to either make it religious our Catholic Church again in England or keep it the same? Well, Queen Elizabeth I, she was a Protestant, just like her grandfather, I guess, at this time. And she decides that she's not going to change to the Catholic religion. This causes Spain to be very, very angry again, with the English causing there to be more tensions and then kind of strains their relationships. So the Spanish decide that they're going to bring their armada to England. They're going to attack and basically force them to become Catholics again. This does not go well for the Spanish. The English had created these tiny little ships, as that you can kind of see in this picture where you have these small little ships here. And the Spanish had these gigantic, huge vessels. Now, the difference between the small ships and the big ships are the big ships, they go very, very slowly and they take a long time to move. But the small ships are very quick and they can kind of dart in and kind of shoot a bunch of people or shoot a bunch of the ships and maybe sink the ships and then kind of dart out without actually getting attacked too much. So the English, they successfully defeat the Spanish in this, and this is one of the biggest downfalls in Spain. It weakens Spain so much that they lose control of the sea, and this allows there to be an open route to the Americas up for grab for any European country that now wants to explore this new world. A French explorer by the name Samuel de Champlain, he takes ships and goes from France and starts to explore the New World. Samuel de Champlain starts up northern near Newfoundland and along the St. Lawrence River, where you can kind of see an arrow pointing here. And the St. Lawrence River kind of flows down through Canada into the United States. And then the Hudson River actually meets it, and the Hudson River flows through New York out into the Atlantic Ocean. So the French, when they're exploring Canada, they realize, one, it's very cold, and what are you going to find in cold weather is animals with fur. So one of the things that actually the French do is they set up their homes. They're able to use furs as profit to sell or trade. They make friends with the Indians. They end up trading trading with the Native Americans for the animal skins that are so highly valued in Europe. They send those animal skins back to Europe, and they make a lot of money with those animal skins that the natives were hunting and that they were trading with. Unlike the British would actually go in and take over land by force, but the French actually, they wanted to negotiate, pay for it, and be a little bit more friendly. So the natives kind of liked the French a lot more than the English at this period of time. So the French end up becoming a much bigger colony. They start growing. More people start coming over from France. They actually named their colony New France. And then they have more explorers that to continue to explore the land going south towards Louisiana. So they kind of control this territory that is in blue on this map. Now Spain's territory here is in pink. And notice it's not going to get any bigger. It's actually going to get a lot smaller as they start to lose the land because they are unable to continue to have enough forces to control the land. So Britain and France think that they are both in control of the lands in America, especially the lands that was going to be known as the Ohio River Valley. These lands are disputed over the two of them, and they cannot decide who owns what land. And eventually, when we get into that later, we're going to know this conflict to be known as the French and Indian War. And this conflict between who has access or who owns what or who controls what, that all gets settled by the end of that war. On this map, we can see some of the early European countries that come to the New World. The Dutch and the Swedish, they are very small settlements that eventually get taken over by the British. The Spanish still continue to control Florida and most of what we know is to be Central America, Mexico, and the northern part of South America. But the English and the French, they actually take over quite a bit of the America lands, especially the ones in North America. So the colonies that come up is the first one is Roanoke Island, where it is the first colony, the first British colony, and it doesn't do very well. The people there, they set up home, they set up shelter, and they have people leave to go back to England and pick up more people and bring them back. And this is how these colonies would actually become started, was basically the king would have to give you a charter, which was a document that said that you could go to the New World and use the land, and in the return you would actually bring the goods back in the mercantilism ideas that we had talked about before. So the purpose of this was there was a company called the Virginia Company. They actually had a shipping company. They would sail the ships to the New World, and then they would basically dump the people off, go back and get more people, and that's kind of how it went. Well, this first Roanoke Island settlement, when they come back the second time, everybody's gone. Like, they have no idea where anybody was, and it was just like a ghost town. So they figured that this was probably not the best place to set up their life if they are just going to either all die off or get eaten or whatever happens to them. So they go up north a little bit further up into this area of Virginia, and you'll see a town that's called Jamestown. This is the second settlement of the British colonists, and Jamestown becomes very successful. Everybody's doing well, the weather is good, it's good farming, and it's going as well as it can go, but the problem is that you have people that don't really want to build shelter, they don't really want to look for food or cook food, and all they want to do is search for gold, resources, new things to bring back to England and become very wealthy in England. How do you think that's going to go over if you are always trying to search for something but you're never worrying about your food or shelter? Well, this is what happens. Many of the people in the beginning, they begin to starve because they don't have enough food. So there was a man by the name of John Smith. He comes in and he takes charge. He was sent from London to lead the colony. And when he gets there, he makes this one big statement. He says, "He who works not, eats not." So this was a big deal for these people in Jamestown because they really were not interested in shelter and finding food and cooking food. They were really interested in finding new resources. But with John Smith in charge, they had no choice. So basically, he was ruling them with fear. And the unfortunate thing that happens is that when John Smith, he ends up getting hurt, he is then sent back to England to heal, and he never returns back to the colony. But when he leaves, the entire Jamestown area begins to go through a starving period. And so it's kind of like you look at it as the good and the bad. It was good that he was there using force to kind of get the people to follow his rules, and therefore they didn't starve. But without his leadership and his commanding authoritative ways, the people didn't know what to do when he left and end up starving anyways. This, of course, is not the end of the colony. It does kind of bounce back a little bit, but they do set this colony up near a river, and therefore the river has a lot of mosquitoes, and then they end up getting sick from those mosquitoes. And then they decide that they need to start branching out and learning to do in more places. The other thing that happens is what is called the Plymouth Colony. The Plymouth Colony was based on what is called the Pilgrims. And pilgrims are people who were escaping religious persecution. They were looking for new land. And so when they leave England, they go to the New World as a way to escape the religious beliefs that they believed that nobody else believed when they were being harassed. So they come over to this New World and they start their colony. Their main objective was to go to Jamestown because that's where the Virginia Company was taking everyone. But a storm throws them off course and they land way far up here north where you see the Massachusetts Bay. They land right in the Massachusetts Bay in an area they call Plymouth. When they get there, they see no one and they think that they have probably landed in the wrong spot and that they got lost. So at this point, they've decided that none of the rules that the king has set out exists. And when they get there, it's October. So it's a little getting on the cold side. And this is further north in Jamestown, where they were expecting to be warm pretty much throughout the entire year. But in this area, it snows, it gets really cold. And what happens is that they end up almost also starving to death. And it was thanks to the Indians here that actually was the creation of the first Thanksgiving. Who were the Americans in 1750? So the Americans were a group of basically three groups. You had one, the natives, who were the original inhabitants of the land. Then you have the colonists, who were mostly English, some French, and of course there were some Spanish as well. But for the most part, for this particular purpose, it's mostly the British colonists. And they are like farmers, merchants, and skilled workers. And then you have a third group, which are slaves from Africa. So the slaves were forcefully brought to the colonies to provide labor for mostly the people who lived in the southern colonies of America. And in these southern colonies, they were used to do sugar, rice, tobacco, cotton. These were just farming jobs that required a lot of labor, and slaves were a very cheap way to get labor at the time. So the slave owners thought it probably would have benefited them if they were actually paid to do work, because most of us who are paid to do something tend to do it better than those of us who are forced to do something. So why do these people, these Americans, come to the New World? Why would they want to leave England? Why would they want to leave their homeland? The slaves had no choice. They were forcefully brought from Africa to the New World and sold off to the colonists. But the English colonists, they were actually making a choice, and most of the time it was a religious choice. So a lot of the people who actually came to settle in North America, they came to seek opportunity to improve their lives. Some hoped to own land, others hoped to worship or follow the religious beliefs they chose. And another incidences, just like the fact that we were talking about, is that the Africans were brought here as part of an enslaved group to help the production of the farmland in the southern parts of America. So the Americans, they farmed, they sold, they did varieties of work. They came from all over Europe. And the slaves themselves and the Indians who had lived there for thousands of years. Being a child in the colonies was not an easy thing. Children were often put to work, especially those children who lived on the farm, and that was like the most version of American life in the colonies, was being a farmer. So the children during the colonial time, they would work on the farm. They would help out in the house. They would not really go to school, and they would sometimes be allowed to play games. Now, the African American children, the ones that were the slaves that were brought in, were kind of similar. They also worked on the farms with their slave parents. But the one big difference was the slave children were not allowed to play, and were definitely not allowed to learn how to read or write, even if it was offered. The children in the colonies lived a much different life than you today. And the enslaved children lived an even different life. So the children of the colonies, the jobs kind of differed from between the boys and the girls. The boys helped out with outdoor chores such as collecting firewood, planting, harvesting, and building. The girls primarily helped out with the chores inside the house, mostly cooking, cleaning, sometimes going outside and doing the gardening, making clothes, and they also might help with feeding the animals. A farm took a lot of time and effort to run, so making a farm successful required help from all the members of the family. Instead of paying laborers or owning slaves, many families relied on their children to pitch in and help run the farm. At the same time, higher education was not necessary for the type of life that the colonists led at this time. People living in the 1700s had a shorter lifespan than people do today. Parents relied on their children to complete many jobs and tasks that children today are not required to do. This added a level of responsibility to the colonial children, being treated more like adults at a young age. The children of enslaved people began working at a young age as well. As small children, they often looked after their young siblings. They may also have taken on other simpler tasks such as feeding chickens or collecting eggs. Eventually, they were required to do work in the fields where they planted and plowed and harvested crops grown on the plantations. The children of enslaved people did not receive any education, and in many colonies were not even allowed to learn how to read or write. The biggest difference between the colonial children and the enslaved children is that free children, which were the colonial children, worked for their own families, while the enslaved children were forced to work for the profit of someone else. These are just two different little storyboards that I found that somebody created that I thought kind of showed you kind of the work that the different children of the colonies would do. And then the other one is what you would know to be as a slave child, what they would do in the house. The original 13 Colonies is probably going to be best explained by this 13 Colonies song that you're going to be able to go and listen to when you're done watching this. And it's actually a real fun song. But the main idea here that I want to get across is that Britain, which was a monarchy, would send over people through a company called the Virginia Company to set up colonies, and those colonies were then set up to bring resources back to the home country, like the mercantilism ideas that we talked about earlier. And the king would grant a charter to companies or people that wanted to seek new land or new ways of living in the New World. And so one of the first colonies, Jamestown, was a colony that at first did not do very well, since everybody was there just to get rich and not really worry about food or shelter. And they had to send in an authoritarian to kind of control the colony. So England sends over a man by the name of John Smith, and he goes in and he takes over the colony, and he basically makes a statement that says, "He who works not, eats not." And under his leadership, everybody started to thrive. The colony became to be much more productive. One day there's an explosion, and John Smith gets hurt really, really bad and gets sent back to London for treatment. Once he leaves, the entire Jamestown just goes right back to the way it was before, with no leadership and no one really in control. Everybody just kind of fends for themselves, and they go back to a starving time again. Eventually, Jamestown gets better. They start realizing the error of their ways, and they start becoming much more of a colony, and a productive colony at that. So there was another group of people called the Pilgrims. They wanted to sail over to get free from religious persecution from the English, since they believed in a little bit different way than the English did. And they were given a charter to go to Jamestown. Well, there was this big storm, and they got kind of off course, and they landed in Massachusetts. So if you kind of look at the map here, you can see where Jamestown is in the state of Virginia, or the colony of Virginia at this time, and they land in Massachusetts, which is further up north, right above Rhode Island. So when they land in Massachusetts, they realize that they are not where they're supposed to be, and therefore are coming during the winter months. Now, it's much colder and snowier in Massachusetts, and most of these pilgrims actually die of starvation during this time. And this is actually when the Indians find them. They teach them how to work the land and how to build shelter. And this is basically how the first Thanksgiving is created, with a thanks to the Indians for helping them. And I'm going to let the song kind of go over all the other parts of the colonies, but watch it. It's fun. Enjoy it. And then when you're done, the next slide is just going to show you a picture of the assignment they're going to do, and I'll go over that a little bit right now. So this map is on Schoology. There will also be a chart assignment as well. So there's 2 different assignments that you want to do. So here are the instructions in case you get confused. You can always come back to this video and look at it. You're going to label the 13 colonies, and you can go back and listen to that song over and over again if you need to, or you can use your book, or you can even go on the internet and find it. You will label all the colonies. You will color each colony a different color, and you will then label the bodies of water. You will divide the colonies into their 3 different regions, the New England region, the Middle region, and the Southern region. And then you're going to print the chart from Schoology, and then you will use your book or the song to listen to again to go through and find 3 important things that each of the colonies or each of the sections of colonies produced or were beneficial to others by. I hope you enjoyed this way of doing history. If you do enjoy it, please let me know by sending me a comment through Schoology. And if there's anything that you didn't like about it, you can always let me know that too. Since this is all new for all of us, I'm hoping that this is going to be a little bit easier way to do history. Okay? Enjoy, and I'll see you next week. By the way, you have all week to view these videos and do the assignment.